So tell me about the film now. Let's jump into the film Hard Road of Hope, which was based on I admittedly have not seen it. I need to, but it was based on radical action in West Virginia.
Hmm.
So what
Yeah.
happened there?
I feel like some people are watching this now and being like, West Virginia, really? That sounds so exciting.
Well, I grew up in Pennsylvania, so
Okay,
yeah.
so you know. But I would ask folks to hold on because I understand the like that knee jerk reaction that you have. And this is and what kind of what I wanted to figure out is why that is that knee jerk reaction with West Virginia, particularly. Like why I grew up in North Carolina partially. West Virginia was like the butt end of jokes. Like,
Sure. Yeah, well, same
West
growing up in
Virginians,
Pennsylvania.
yeah. And I was like, but like, why? And particularly, I mean, if you're the butt end of jokes in North Carolina, like something's gone wrong. Like, how did that happen? So I was like at first, like going down to West Virginia was part of my journalism work, which had to do a lot with going to frontline fights because I wanted to, whenever possible, via my Patreon millions, is to go to the front lines of a fight in order to really connect with people on the ground. And so I wanted to go down there because of this cross section that's happening with coal. Coal is dying and fracking is on the rise in West Virginia. And it's really this interesting cross section that's like this moment in time that speaks to not just our obsession with fossil fuels, but also a history of oppression at the hands of these corporations and this industry, and a history of breaking up communities, breaking up connection, breaking up unions. Um, and I wanted to see what that was about. And really, what happened is that I took a deep dive, and it ended up being enough to create a documentary. And really, one of the cornerstones of the film is how people are using their history as an organizing tool, which I think is so cool because West Virginia actually has a really radical history. Like one of my favorite little tidbits, and since you haven't seen the film, I'm going to give you some trivia here. Oh my gosh, the tables have turned. I'm the one asking trivia questions.
Right. Yes.
Where does the term redneck come from?
Oh, you know what? You mentioned this on the show, actually. This came up during the trivia game. So I always thought I grew up thinking that it was because whenever people were working out in the fields, their neck would get sunburned.
Nope,
That was the colloquialism, or I don't think that's the right word for it, but that was what you were taught, that was where that word came from. But what's the
that is
actual
incorrect.
what is the
Because the
truth on that?
truth is far too radical to share with school children. The
Sure.
truth is that at the basically the turn of the century, like the early 20th century, in West Virginia and other mining areas, there were huge efforts. There were huge labor rights movements and unionization efforts. And one of the ways, and I'm not talking just like, oh, the white coal miners were over here. Like white coal miners, immigrant coal miners, black coal miners, like all came together and worked together and took up arms and shot at coal barons. And one of the ways that they'd identify themselves was to tie red bandanas around their necks as a sign of solidarity and as a sign of like, hey, we're on the same team.
Yeah, it's
So
not what we were
picture
taught.
in your head in southern West Virginia, the like a state that is quite red, like quite Republican, black and white and immigrant coal miners marching together with guns and firing at coal barons with red bandanas around their necks. Those are the original rednecks. And I love that story for two reasons. One is just totally badass. And two, it just speaks to the deep propagandization that's happened. The fact that now redneck is considered this derogatory term against predominantly poor white people who are racist and bigoted and not at all left and like in the labor rights movement. So like how well that they've twisted this term and buried that history so that we can't use it for our means, but instead it becomes literally a tool to the antithesis of what these workers were fighting for.
So you dwell in many different mediums. I mean, you make films, you do music, you do straight up journalism, you do podcasts. Do you have a favorite? And do you feel that one is the most effective versus the other ones?
Hmm. To quote my mother, I love all my children equally. I mean, I think like I really it was my first film, and so I have far less experience in it, but I really enjoyed that. And I'd say that music and I have a much more like fraught kind of like lifetime movie esque relationship.
Sure.
I've been with music since I was 4, so we have this kind of like you know. Um, and journalism and photojournalism I think is incredibly important, and I think like shows like yours where you bring up these stories and you bring people on to discuss their work in whatever mediums they're doing. I think that like that's hugely important, and I think that what's really important about like that diversity of mediums is that you never know where you're going to get people, right? Like one of my favorite things when I would play live is when somebody would come up and be like, "Oh, I just thought I was going to go listen to some music, but then I learned that we've got 1,000 military bases around the world." Like,
Mm,
I wasn't expecting that. And I like, art, and by that I don't just mean music. I mean film. I mean comedy. I mean poetry. Like all of these mediums are so powerful at reaching people in ways that handing them like a sheet of statistics just doesn't. I mean, no offense to statisticians, like what you do is super important and I totally use your work, but like i'm saying I'm saying that like that immediate emotional connection, because humans have that emotional connection when you laugh or when you hear a song and it hits you, or when you watch a visual and it hits you. You don't have time to give this sort of like knee-jerk reaction of like, well, wait, I'm a Republican and I think it's just you're just moved by it somehow. And I think that that's so important because these are the mediums that that shift perspectives. And I like to say that, no, art is not going to burn down an empire, but it'll inspire the people who do. And it'll be there for the people who do in like a way that is I really think a deep self-care. Whether that be to laugh at jokes or whether that be to sing songs together or what have you. Like this is a way that humans connect and that we build community, and that we grieve, or that we get we unpack things and deal with things. And the system's well aware that's why they work so much in the arts. That's why the Pentagon's tight with Hollywood. That's why people like Phil Oakes have were hounded, and Billie Holiday were hounded by the FBI and the state, because they know how powerful these mediums are in shifting people's perspectives. So I'd say like I think all of them are incredibly important, and I couldn't say which one's my favorite, but I think that they're all incredibly important depending on like where you're reaching people. But absolutely, creative thinking and art are keystones of any successful push.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your